right. Welcome to the School Turnaround Podcast. My name is Dr. Chance Lewis, and I'm so excited for the next guest on our show. Our guest today is none other than Dr. Kelly Gunn. Thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate you being here. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Good. So excited about the information that you'll share with us today. So just for background, the whole purpose of our time here on the School Turnaround Podcast, as you know, school turnaround initiatives are real all across the country as we seek to improve schools and increase educational opportunities for students as well. I've had the privilege of knowing you quite a long time as well, but I would love for you to introduce yourself to our viewing audience and let them know a little bit of your story and how you got to the point of where you are now, and let people know what your current role is in your school as well.
Absolutely. Thanks again for having me. We go way back. I love to
Yes.
tell the story. Dr. Chance Lewis, before he was Dr. Chance Lewis, was my high school computer science teacher.
Oh, look at her. She's dating me on my own podcast.
So I love to say that. But I also, I think in hindsight, crediting you with, going into education and thinking about you can be cool and be an educator.
Well, I appreciate that.
I appreciate that. So yeah, my journey in education began actually in high school. I wanted to be a teacher. So, some people's stories are very different, but at that high school, shout out to Glen Oaks High School, I had a 12th grade teacher, Miss Janine Johnson, who let us flip the script one day, and she let me teach her class. She said, "You always have something to say. You always have a lot," and she allowed me to teach her class. And I was like, "Oh my God, I think I love this. I want to do this." And so I was able to major in English education, so English with certification to teach at Tennessee State University, where excellence is our habit. And there, I really do appreciate the HBCU experience because it was tailored to learning to teach our children. And so I'm grateful for that. I got a chance to have some very diverse placements in student teaching and being prepared for this work. Left Tennessee State and started my teaching career in Dallas around the time of a lot of changes in legislation, No Child Left Behind. And I was told if you can teach in Texas, the nation tends to follow Texas, you can go anywhere.
Sure.
So there was a lot of accountability measures, a lot of new testing regulations around that time. And so I taught in Texas. Middle school. And after teaching some time in Texas, teaching some years in Texas, I started noticing that a lot of teachers didn't have the experience that I had, like coming into education, really being prepared. I think I was a very prepared teacher. Like I knew what to do. I had been trained really well to do that work, and not everybody had that opportunity. And so I remember one teacher coming in and leaving for lunch, and this teacher mailed his keys back to the school. He was like, "Yeah, I'm good. I don't want to do that work."
I remember that happened at the school where I taught you at too as well. So similar story. So.
Yes. And so I was like, well, what was unique about my experience? How are people being trained to teach our children? And so I wanted to go back to school and really dig into that work. And I was also interested in being an educational leader. So I took some time and went back to school. I went to LSU and got my master's in educational administration leadership. But then I was also interested in curriculum and instruction. What's the curriculum that's being put before our kids? So I got a specialist in that. My family teases me. I like school a whole lot. And at the time, the University of Cincinnati had the only urban education leadership program. And so I decided to go to school there because I really wanted to dig into, well, what is urban educational leadership? What does that look like?
Sure.
I think my experience has been different working in some of these larger cities and working with different populations and diverse populations and underserved communities or under-resourced communities. And so I went there and began to dig into a lot of that work, which is where I rediscovered Dr. Chance Lewis. I was like, "Oh, you're teaching and learning in diverse classrooms. Let's talk about this." And even decided to dig into and make my dissertation that work. So at the time, the University of Cincinnati, which was sitting in a very chocolate city, a very Black city, where we're
Sure.
training teachers to go into education, was not placing any student teachers in Cincinnati public schools. And I was like, well, this is
Sure.
crazy.
Right.
How are we not doing that? And then not only that, but there was no course that was specifically looking at teaching in diverse classrooms. And so
Right.
another plug to you, Dr. Lewis, your book, I used that book as part of my dissertation work, and looking at that work, and I designed a course for the University of Cincinnati called Teaching and Learning in Diverse Classrooms.
Great.
And that was the first course of its kind.
Mm-hmm.
And I was making a point in my dissertation that we needed to make sure that teachers were being trained for urban classrooms, because that's where the jobs were. And I
Right.
had so many students who were saying, I want to go back to where I came from, meaning
Of
that
course.
80% white, female, monolingual from the
Right.
suburb. But then they were finding there are no jobs there. People who are
Right.
there are staying there. And so that was a lot of the work that I did there. Kind of had my foot in both places of, do I want to stay in academia? Do I want to do practitioner's work?
Right.
And did a little bit of both for a time. Got a chance to teach at the university level. I taught at the University of Cincinnati. I've taught at Northern Kentucky University.
Yeah.
Eventually moved to Atlanta for personal reasons.
Yeah.
And so I got a chance to move to Atlanta. I'm in a school today, and we got word that Atlanta Public Schools is having some internet issues today, of all days.
Okay.
So moved to Atlanta, and for the first time worked with a charter school organization. Now, coming from Louisiana, coming from a family of educators, I remember my grandmother, who was a retired Orleans public school counselor, saying, "You going to work for a charter school?"
Yeah.
Which
Right.
was really strange, and like the juxtaposition of what that meant. But I learned a lot from that organization, and I learned, like, at the end of the day, people want options for their kids, and they want the best options for the kids, and parents deserve choice for their kids, and they deserve the best choice for their kids. So fast forward that, got a chance to do that. So I've worked in traditional public schools. I've worked in charter schools. I've served as the dean of academics in Atlanta public schools in a traditional school. I've served in a school serving all girls. I've served as a director for charter schools. And then currently, my current role, I have 3 schools here in Atlanta. I work for an organization called the Condesi Schools, and we have 2 K-8 schools, one pre-K through 5, which is a partner school. Atlanta Public Schools has given us that school to run our model with. And we serve about 1,200 geniuses. We do call them geniuses, thinking about the words of our ancestors, Dr.
Sure.
Asa Hilliard. I've
Right.
never encountered a child in any group who is not a genius. And so we do refer to them as such. And the word Kendezi actually comes from the Congo. And it means the Congo art of babysitting, but not in the Western sense, but in the
Right.
sense of it is the most treasured role to be able to be responsible for the nurturing of a child.
Great, and that's great. And given the long list of experience that you had, that's why I was so excited to have you here on the show to talk about school turnaround. So the first question I want to ask you, based on your experience as a leader in this space, I know you have thought about initiatives that you have wanted to implement at the school, to serve the populations that you have served over the years. But in your current situation, as you innovate, talk to us a little bit about strategies that you have implemented or initiatives that you have implemented that, in your viewpoint, have been successful. And what was your thinking around it? Because as a person who sits in your seat, you have to have a vision about what you want to happen and kind of see it before it happens and then go through the implementation process. So talk to us about some examples of some successes that you've had with some initiatives that you have implemented.
Awesome. So we are doing turnaround work right now. And I think
Right.
one of the things that's super important for a turnaround is to make sure that you have a turnaround team.
Right.
There's a difference between a team that's just, working in a blue ribbon school that's already
Right.
pressed down, shaken together, good measure,
Yep.
and
That's
a
right.
school that that is experiencing turnaround. And so I had to be very strategic around making sure that I had the right team, the right leaders. And part of that was some really strategic recruitment, and something that we started last year. And even like it's change management. You have to change the ideas and the mindsets of some people around you who've been doing the same thing for a long time, who want to continue with the status quo.
Right.
And sometimes it feels jarring to make
Hmm.
some changes in that role. But one of the things I had to do was think about how do we attract top talent. And so we originally had a model where we had 2 teachers in every classroom, K through 5, and 2 teachers who were getting a full-time salary. So in K
Right.
5, one teacher was teaching math and science, one teacher was teaching ELA, social studies. And we have a very small classroom size. So we were having about 16 kids and 2 adults. That's a
Got it.
very, very expensive model. Very
Very
expensive model.
expensive. Yeah.
And that's the model that I came into, and that's what people were accustomed to. But one, we were seeing that, yeah, it sounds really good, but it wasn't being impactful. So you have
Right.
this small class size, and you have 2 teachers, but because you have 2 teachers and you needed to fill more spaces. So think about traditionally in an elementary classroom, you might have 22 to 26 kids.
Right.
For that model, we were, the same elementary classroom. Sometimes we needed double and sometimes triple the number of teachers. And so over
Right.
time, especially considering, post pandemic, it was really hard to staff that model.
Of
And so
course.
you started, and I'm being fully transparent, we started
Yep.
getting a lot of bodies. So we were
Yep.
getting a lot of quantity over quality. And I had to make the executive decision to say, this model doesn't work. It doesn't serve us. One, we're not
Right.
getting impact for it. 2, it's too expensive to continue to run this model. And we can't do this anymore. And so
Sure.
one of the strategic initiatives was to cut that model and say, hey, what do people really value? We value a family style classroom, not necessarily a family size. And that's
Hmm.
a great conversation to have too,
Right.
because my family is real tight and my daddy has 14 brothers and sisters. That's a lot of people.
Right. Of course.
So it wasn't necessarily about the size, but it was about the style. Like, are we teaching in a way that's conducive to differentiated instruction, individualized instruction? There doesn't have to be 2 teachers doing that. And then as we were thinking about like growing our own talent, we changed that model to say, well, what if we have 1 teacher and then we have an instructional pair who's learning from that teacher? And we did a residency program where teachers are learning from the experienced mentor teacher, and we don't have that expensive model anymore. And so that was able to cut our budget by $3.2 million to be able to say, we're going to have less teachers. We're going to look for a more quality teacher. We're going to pay our teachers more when they have more experience. So we went
Got
up
it.
on our pay scale at the 5-year mark, $10,000.
Hmm.
Because I'm in turnaround work. I need people who are ready to do
Right.
this work, who are experienced. And we know that a lot of times in this work, our kids get the short end of the stick when they get the TFA teacher who
Right.
has no experience, who's only had 6 weeks of training, when I
Of
need the
course.
teacher who is really experienced and knows how to do this work. So we took a real calculated risk and said, you know what? We are going to scale back on our model. We're going to put more money into more experienced teachers. And we're also going to, at the same time, grow our own. And so that's an
Right.
initiative that's making sure that my kids get high quality, experienced teachers in front of them.
And that's innovative because I'm sure that model you just explained. Many, as you know, many schools are not using a model like that. So as they start to, make examinations of initiatives that are being successful, I commend you because you made a decision as the leader to say, "Hey, this is not working," and then you changed the course. So your success initiative also had challenges you had built into it that you had to deal with as well and make those decisions. And a lot of times, the reason why I commend you for that because many school leaders will wait years and years down the line before they make that decision to change, and you changed it quickly and reverse course to make it successful as well. So let me ask you this then. Let's go deeper into it. So sometimes success brings challenges, as you mentioned, right? So now that you have implemented that, what we want to start to look at now, how are you monitoring and evaluating, right, the success of the decision that you made? Because we know in school turnaround, oftentimes people make decisions, but they may not evaluate it or monitor it to see if it's being successful. So talk to our viewing audience about how you kind of view the monitoring and evaluation of initiatives like what you did as well for the school.
Great question. So one of the things we really looked at was Post-pandemic, we're having a lot of trouble with teacher retention, teachers being happy in the profession, teachers leaving the profession in droves. So we not only want to get high quality teachers, but we want to retain them. So we wanted to get them somewhere where they wanted to stay. And when we were doing research around what makes a teacher want to stay, they're looking for places where they feel like they're growing professionally. They look
Right.
for a place where they feel like they're valued. And so we started to really look at that and started to explore what does that look like for us. So one of the measures that we look at is the Net Promoter Score, NPS. NPS, I describe this to my team as basically, would you eat the food at the restaurant where you work? So the
Right.
question that's asked to our staff is, how likely are you to recommend Kendesi to a colleague or a friend?
Mm-hmm.
That question, and they rate that on a scale of 0 to 10. Now, 9 and 10s are your promoters. 7
Right.
or 8s are kind of your passives. 5 and 6 are your distractors. Anything underneath that is your detractor. And
Right.
so we were looking at what does that look like in education as a whole. So right now, education as a whole, people are like, I would not recommend this.
Right.
But if you look at that score and if you know anything about how that works, the closer you are to 0, the better you are.
Mm-hmm.
When I first came to this organization in 2020, for my particular team, which is the network team, which would be equivalent to like a district, because we're like a small
Right.
district, the net promoter score was a negative 99.
Wow.
Negative 99.
Mm.
People saying, I would not recommend this. At our schools, we were around like a negative 65. People saying, I would not. And so one of the things I said was like, no wonder nobody's coming to work here. People are saying they would not recommend this. So let's
Right.
measure this work and see what we need to do to get good people in the door, to get good people in front of our kids, to get positive people in front of our kids. And so we really started paying attention to, well, tell me what's making you not want to be here. And one of the things that people said was, I don't feel like I'm growing professionally. So we made that a metrics. I feel like I'm growing professionally.
Sure.
Last year. And so then we start putting some things into place. So everybody has a coach. Even I have a coach. Everybody has a coach.
Right.
So you
Everybody
feel
has a
like you're growing
coach.
professional. Everybody has a coach. I have a
Excuse me.
coach. Everybody has a coach. So that's one place where you feel like you're growing professionally. We created a cohort for teachers new to the profession. It's called Teach Like an Indesi. You participate in the cohort. You get a stipend for participating in that cohort, but it just makes you a better teacher. And these are just, strategies for new teachers who may not have had the privilege of having a program like I have. So we have a cohort for that. We have leader connections. We have opportunities where people just feel whole. So one of our
Mm-hmm.
core values is wholeness. And so our wholeness ambassadors got together and we're asking teachers, like, what are some of the things you want to do? And they were like, we want to connect on the clock. So we noticed that people wanted the opportunity to have community at work. And so we started putting all these things into place. And we found last year, at the end of the year, 59% of our staff said they feel like they're growing professionally. This year at the halfway mark in January, 82% of our staff say that they feel
Wow,
like they're
that's a
growing
big difference.
professionally. Big difference. And so when people feel good at work and they feel like they're growing, like they're giving my kids the best that they got, when they feel good and they feel like they're getting the best they got. Another metric is going back to that NPS score. Again, I told you when I took over that team, they were at a negative 99. Right now, that team is at a positive 65. Like that's
Oh,
a
that's great.
huge
Huge.
difference, right? But it's because we're listening to our staff, we're thinking about what needs to happen. And that's part of the turnaround work. It's not just about the academic metrics, but making sure that you get the right team in place to get you to the academic metrics.
Right.
So I think that's been a lot of the work that we've done as we're thinking about that. Not only, one of our goals says, are we hiring and retaining Genius Awakening team members? Part of that hiring is the attraction of, is this a great place to work? And then retaining, like keeping it that way. And then in the end, you'll see that for a kid. So you walked into a school where you saw no joy, nobody wants to be there. You think kids want to be there? So that's one of the things that we were really working on, is making sure that we get our teams right.
Now, another question I wanted to ask you, because that is phenomenal, and I'm glad you shared that, because I hope people go back and to listen to what you said, how you move the needle, in your school as well. Now, another big struggle area I see for leaders and others that are working in the school is community engagement, changing the culture around the school, because there's really no preparation around that in a lot of programs or training. So how did you manage to change the school community with the parents, community, business partners? What was your kind of thinking around that as well?
I think that's a great question. And it starts with when I first came into this work in 2020, one of the things I wanted to do is have a really strong strategic plan.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the first things in that was to really look at our identity work. And we dug into and asked our kids, we asked our families, we asked our staff, we asked our community, like, who are we? What should our core values be? And so we did some work in that. And then we created our core values. In addition to our core values, we also created what we call equity commitments. And our first equity commitment is we believe that every child is innately gifted with genius. The second equity commitment is we believe that our staff mindsets are important, so that really have to think about like what's in your mindset, because that comes out in your work. And then the third one is we believe that our families, our partners, and our communities make us stronger. And so to answer your question, we always lean into, we believe that our families, our partners, and our communities make us stronger. And we are nestled in the heart of Atlanta, three very different locations, but three very unique communities. And a lot of times I think the mistake that's made is people come in and say, oh, let me teach you how to get out of your community. It's important for you to get out. And we embrace our community because our communities are beautiful. And we believe that our community has genius just like our kids. And so when you believe that your community is beautiful and you embrace that in your community, then you're able to bring in those partnerships and be able to do that work. And so with that, we remove barriers for our families. So because we believe that our families, partners, and communities make us stronger, we remove barriers. So one example, the school I'm in now, we actually have a grocery store on site for our families.
Oh,
so in
wow, that's great.
Yes, in partnership with the Good Art Store, shout out to Jasmine Crow, who's doing that work. We had a community partner that helped us and wrote a grant to get this grocery store in our school. It's stocked every Monday, and we wanted to make sure that our families can shop with dignity. A lot of times, if you go to the food bank, they just say, here's a box. Here's a box of throwaway, almost expired stuff for you. But this is a place where they can come in and actually get the stuff that they want and the stuff that they value. Not everybody drinks cow milk. So guess what? We have almond milk in the grocery store. Not everybody eats meat. So we have salmon, we have shrimp, we have things that to show our community that we value them, and they can come in once a week. But we also show accountability, like, hey, families, you can come in as long as your child is coming to school, right? So that accountability of attendance, like we are partnering together. There's a washer and dryer in this space. If you need to come in and use our washer and dryer. Last week we had a film screening. We've been doing a lot of work around the science of reading and looking at the strategies of how you learn to read and how your brain works. And we're brought in our families. Hey, families, we want to show you this film. We want to get you bought into the science of reading. We want to share the strategies that we are using as teachers with you, because you are your child's first teacher. Partner with us because we want you to be able to have these strategies. But in addition to that, when you come here, we want to remove barriers. So we are providing childcare for you. We're providing dinner for you. We're going to give you a take-home kit when you have literacy things. So we believe in removing barriers, and we believe in partnership. One of the things that is a staple at the Kendesi schools is a home visit. And so when kids join our families, our teachers go out, myself included. I had kids who went to school here for 3 years. Teachers came to my house and sat down with me and said, tell me about your child. What's your child's genius? What is it that you desire for your child? And then that type of communication where they're saying, then they can call and say, hey, here is where, can you help me out? Here's where I'm struggling with your child. Like, you see yourself as a partner, and that type of engagement is not it doesn't feel like, oh, here's the school just telling me something, but it's the school values me. And I also think that's part of the African tradition of the Congo. When we talk about Ndezi, it is a community. We're a community where we work in partnership. Like, we believe our parents are teachers too. And so when we think about that work, we approach this very differently. And it's not us and them, but we're in this together, and we love your geniuses together. Partnership.
Yeah. So based on this, because you dropped a lot of nuggets in that. So let's talk through, in our remaining time together, let's talk about recommendations that you would give to a new leader who may be entering the school turnaround work, or another person that may be watching and say, I'm in the school turnaround work, but I don't have ideas of how I can be creative. And like what you mentioned with the grocery store and a number of other initiatives, what advice would you give people in the viewing audience if they're entering this work or need to be re-energized in this work? What advice would you share with them?
Oh, I think that's a great question. And the example you give, you say, what if I don't have those ideas? I think it goes back to my original thought when I was talking about building the right team. The
Mm-hmm.
right team has balance and not finding those people who are what you are not. I think that a big part of turnaround work and something that we don't talk about is it takes an entrepreneurial spirit to do this work because you do have to be creative, but that doesn't mean that you have to hold all the balls. So if you are not the creative person to think about these things, then who on your team is? And
Right.
so just making sure that you find a balanced team and you find people to be what you are not and people to push to the next level. I think that's a big part of it. I think something that was really helpful for us was taking the time up front to go slow so we could go fast. We
Mm-hmm.
spent about 6 to 8 months really working on a strong strategic plan. And that was in 2020. We called that plan Transformation 2025. So we're in the fourth year of that. But taking that time to really do that work up front and figure out like where are we going? And even
Mm-hmm.
before we got to where we going, the question of who are we? So I was entering the space as the second executive director coming after the founder. And while that founder had done some beautiful things, it had been 10 years into the organization and the organization had shifted. It wasn't the same organization. It wasn't that same mom and pop that he had founded
Right.
years ago. And I
Right.
think that was important to sit down and say, like, let's dig into our identity. And so with that work, we shifted our core values. And I think even with that, that guides us every day. Like one of our core values is love. Do our families or do our staff, do our geniuses feel loved and valued by our words and actions? And that's something that I can come back to every day. One of our core values is audacity. Like, are you having audacity for my kids? I need you to dream
Right.
bigger. Like, I
Right.
need you to freedom
Yeah.
dream.
Yeah.
And so I think that grounds me a lot. And that came from the strategic plan. So I think if you have an opportunity to really sit down and one, make sure you get the right team. And when I say the right team, find people who are what you are not. And then the second part of that is really build a strong plan and have an opportunity for strong strategic planning. Our strategic planning was also deeply rooted in who we are. It wasn't just my team sitting around the table, but it was our
Right.
kids had a voice in it, our families had a voice in it, and that's the root of who we are too. Like we have 3 new principals this year. Our kids had a voice in who those principals were. Our families had a
Oh, that's
voice in who
great.
those principals were.
That's great. And looking at that, I mean, when you look at those kind of recommendations, I mean, I know your heart because I've been knowing you for a number of years, and I know the legacy that you want to leave. So I think another part that I want to ask you is about sustainability, right? Because most leaders, we both know example where a school leader comes in, they do great things, and then they leave, then the school falls, right? So I know your heart for sustainability. So what advice would you give people for sustainability of keeping a school once you turn it around to keep it at a high level, right? How do you think about that? Even if you're not there in the future, how do you have to think about legacy and sustainability in the school turnaround work?
I love that question. And I think it lives in going back to what I said about having that strong strategic plan and a strong sense of identity.
Hmm.
If it falls apart when you leave, then, was that real leadership?
Right.
So I think that real leadership is managing through layers and making sure that it permeates throughout that space. And so when thinking about legacy building and sustainability is so much bigger than me. But one of our core values is collective responsibility. I am because we are. And if you truly believe that, then you're constantly pouring into others. One of the rules on my team is that you never do anything alone. And you never do
Sure.
anything alone, any project or anything, because one, it's selfish. Somebody can be learning
Yeah.
from you.
Right.
And then two, it's also legacy building and capacity building to constantly pour into somebody else. And I think that's a big part of sustainability too, is the fact that you're always pouring into the next or making sure that it can last without you. And so that would be my piece on that I think it's a personal responsibility, collective responsibility that we have as a people, that we are thinking beyond ourselves and making sure that we are pouring into others and we are building this thing to be more than just us.
Great, great. I love that. So since we have this platform and you shared so many innovative things that you're doing, I'm sure you will probably have some people who would love to reach out to you to know more about your school and, even, contacting you to pay a visit as well. So let people know how they can contact you. Let us know where your school is located. Let's just put your school out there on this platform. Let us know where you're located in Atlanta so people could know as well. So let's just share the information about your school so our viewing audience can know.
Absolutely. So our schools are the Kendesi schools here in Atlanta, Georgia. We are a network of charter schools and one traditional public school that operates under our model, meaning it's a neighborhood school that operates under our model. So we have Kendesi West, which is on the west side of Atlanta. If you're familiar with Atlanta, that's Adamsville, feeds into Mays High School, historic high school. We also have Kendesi at Gideon's, which is the Adamsville, Adair Park area. And then we also have Kendesi 04th Ward, which is in historic Midtown. You can find us online at Kendesi, kindezi.org. So that's www.kendesi.org. Our mission is to provide every child, regardless of background, need, or identity, a holistic genius awakening education built on family-style classrooms, conscious diversity, and scholarly excellence. You can follow us on Instagram, Twitter. Our Instagram page is popping. Follow us on Instagram. You can follow me on Twitter at KendeziED. Again, that's KINDEZIED, Kendesi Executive Director. Again, my name is Dr. Kelly Morgan Gunn. We're on all of those platforms. We are happy to get our word out. Right now, I feel like we're one of the best kept secrets in Atlanta. I don't want to be that anymore. So we're making sure that we share that space. And yeah, that's who we are.
Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. You shared a lot of nuggets of wisdom with us today. So I really, truly appreciate you being here. So thank you as well. Thank you so much for joining us today.